How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AITA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
Taylor Dawson kept her eyes on the wet asphalt as the city slid past her windshield, gray and slow, like it always did after rain. Portland looked the same as it had that morning. Bridges wrapped in mist, storefronts half-lit, traffic moving with tired patients. But everything felt different now. The courthouse was already behind her, yet its weight still sat heavy in her chest, as if she had carried the verdict out with her and locked it inside the car. The divorce hearing had ended quickly, too quickly. Papers shuffled, voices measured and polite. A judge who never once looked at her long enough to see the full damage. Daniel Dawson had stood across the room in a tailored suit, calm and confident, his attorney speaking for him in smooth, precise sentences. Taylor had tried to follow every word, but they blurred together once the decision was read aloud. The house would go to Daniel. There would be no spousal support. Any remaining claims were dismissed. The DNA test, submitted without her knowledge, she insisted, had been accepted into evidence. She remembered opening her mouth to object, the sound of her own voice shaking as she tried to explain that something wasn't right. A test like that required consent. It required oversight. It required time. But Daniel's lawyer had been ready, documents already prepared, arguments already polished. By the time the judge called for order, the outcome had already settled into place. The gavel came down once, final and unremarkable, and with it went the last pieces of the life she had built. Now she drove. That was what she did. She drove because the car payment still had to be made, because rent did not wait for grief, because Lily needed dinner whether the world felt fair or not. In the back seat, Lily slept in her car seat, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. A strand of hair had fallen across her forehead, and Taylor reached back at a red light to brush it aside, careful not to wake her. The car was old, older than she liked to admit, and it rattled slightly when the engine idled, but it was clean and it ran, and for now it was enough. They shared meals whenever they could. Leftovers stretched across days. Groceries were chosen with care, every price checked twice. Childcare had become a luxury Taylor no longer had access to. Babysitters cost more per hour than she earned on slow nights, and the few friends who might have helped worked their own long shifts. So Lily rode with her when she had to, tucked safely in the back, learning the city by streetlight and skyline. Taylor's phone buzzed with a notification from the rideshare app. Another request. She didn't accept it right away. She let the phone sit on the dashboard while she breathed, counted to 5, then 10. Anger never came. It would have been easier if it had. Instead, there was only exhaustion, a deep, bone-heavy fatigue that settled behind her eyes and pressed down on her shoulders. She had loved Daniel once, or at least she had believed she did. He had been charming, driven, always talking about the future as if it were something he could plan down to the smallest detail. Somewhere along the way, that future had stopped including her. The long hours turned into nights away. The distance grew quiet and deliberate. By the time she understood what was happening, he was already gone, taking with him not just the marriage, but the narrative. In court, he had looked like a man who had simply moved on. She had looked like an inconvenience. The rain started again, light but persistent, tapping against the windshield in a soft, uneven rhythm. Taylor turned on the wipers and eased the car into traffic, her movements automatic. She knew these streets. She knew where the potholes were, which intersections backed up during rush hour, which routes saved time even if the app didn't suggest them. Driving gave her something solid to hold on to, something that made sense when everything else felt unsteady. At another stoplight, she glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. Her daughter shifted slightly but didn't wake. One hand curled into the fabric of her jacket. Taylor felt the familiar pull in her chest, sharp and protective. Whatever had been taken from her that day, this was still hers. This small, sleeping life. This responsibility. This reason to keep going. The light turned green. Taylor pressed the accelerator and merged back into the flow of the city, carrying her quiet devastation with her. Unseen by the passing cars, unacknowledged by the buildings rising on either side. For now, there would be no dramatic reckoning, no sudden change. Just the road ahead, the steady hum of the engine, and the long work of surviving what had already been decided. The request came through just as Taylor turned off the waterfront and headed toward the transit hub. 2 passengers, short wait time, standard fare. She accepted without thinking. Easing the car into the designated pickup lane where buses idled and people moved in small, purposeful clusters, rolling suitcases behind them. The man and woman were easy to spot. They stood slightly apart from the crowd, each holding a modest travel bag. Nothing flashy, nothing heavy. When Taylor pulled up, the man checked the license plate, then opened the rear door carefully. The woman followed, closing it softly behind her. No slamming, no hurried movements. It was a small thing, but Taylor noticed. They paused when they saw Lily asleep in the back seat. "Oh, sorry," the woman said quietly, her voice already lowered. "We didn't realize." "It's fine," Taylor replied, keeping her tone neutral. "She'll sleep through it." The man nodded, offering a brief, polite smile, and they both settled in. Almost immediately, they leaned slightly toward each other, their heads angled inward, their voices dropping to a respectful murmur. It was the kind of instinct Taylor had come to appreciate, people who understood that this car, for now, was more than just transportation. She pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. She didn't ask the usual questions. She didn't comment on the weather or the traffic or the delay near the station. Some riders wanted conversation. Others didn't. These 2 clearly didn't. Outside, the city unfolded in familiar layers. Concrete overpasses streaked with rain. Brick buildings softened by ivy. Coffee shops glowing warm behind fogged windows. The kind of scenery that blended together when you'd driven it often enough. Taylor let it pass without really seeing it. Her focus narrowed to the road ahead and the quiet rhythm of the car. The passengers spoke softly behind her, just enough that she could register the cadence of their voices without catching the words. She didn't try to listen. She had learned long ago that overhearing was an occupational hazard, not an invitation. Whatever people carried with them into the back seat was theirs, not hers. At a long red light, Taylor glanced in the mirror. Lily hadn't moved. Her breathing was slow and even, her head tilted slightly to one side. Taylor adjusted the heat by a single degree, careful not to make the cabin too warm. The light changed. They moved again. The ride remained unremarkable. No wrong turns. No sudden braking. The app's route took them past the river and through a stretch of quieter streets where traffic thinned and the city felt briefly distant. Taylor followed the directions exactly, neither rushing nor dragging the time out. She drove the way she always did, smooth, deliberate, predictable. Behind her, the man cleared his throat softly, as if about to speak more loudly, then thought better of it. The woman responded with a few words, still hushed. Whatever they were discussing seemed contained, measured. There was no tension in their posture, no visible urgency. If anything, they appeared calm, almost patient. Taylor kept her gaze forward. She was aware of them in the way a driver is aware of everything and nothing at once, the weight of the car, the hum of the engine, the presence of other lives sharing a small space for a short stretch of time. It was part of the job. It was part of the anonymity. As they crossed another bridge, the rain eased, leaving the road slick but reflective. Streetlights stretched long and thin across the pavement. The city felt suspended, neither fully awake nor fully at rest. Nothing about the ride suggested it would matter. It was just another request, another pair of passengers, another quiet drive through streets Taylor knew by heart. She had no reason to mark the moment, no instinct telling her to pay closer attention. If someone had asked her later, she would have said the same thing she always did, that it was ordinary, forgettable, exactly like so many others. She drove on, unaware that the calm settling over the car was only temporary, that the normalcy of this ride was setting the baseline for something that would soon refuse to remain quiet. The shift from silence to speech was gradual, almost imperceptible. At first, the voices behind Taylor blended into the background noise of the car, the low hum of tires on wet pavement, the steady whir of the heater. Then, little by little, the words began to separate themselves from the sound. The woman spoke first, her tone calm, deliberate. She still kept her voice low, clearly mindful of the sleeping child, but there was a confidence in the way she spoke, as if she were outlining something already decided. "If everything goes the way we expect," she said, "the cleaning position should give me access within the first week." The man responded quietly, asking a question Taylor couldn't quite make out. She didn't turn the radio up. She didn't shift in her seat. She told herself she wasn't listening, that it was just another conversation passing through her car. "Cleaning staff are invisible," the woman continued. "No one questions where you're going or why you're there, especially after hours." Taylor's fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. It wasn't unusual, she reasoned. People talked about work all the time. Offices, shifts, plans. There was nothing inherently alarming about that. Then the woman said a name. "Once I'm inside Daniel Dawson's company," she went on, "the rest will come down to timing." The name landed with a weight that felt physical. Taylor's foot moved before her mind could catch up. The car slowed abruptly, the motion sharp enough to jolt everyone inside. Lily stirred in her seat, letting out a small sound before settling again. Behind Taylor, the man sucked in a breath. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern cutting through his careful restraint. Taylor's heart hammered against her ribs. For a split second, her vision narrowed. The road ahead blurring at the edges. Daniel Dawson. Not a common name. Not in her world. Not in this city. Not attached to a company. Not spoken in this context. Not like that. She forced herself to breathe. "There's a dip in the road," she said quickly, easing pressure back onto the accelerator. Didn't want to hit it too fast. The explanation sounded thin even to her own ears, but the car smoothed out as she guided it forward. Traffic behind them flowed on, unaware of the moment that had just passed. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Right. Makes sense." The woman said nothing, but her posture shifted subtly, as if she had become more alert. Taylor kept her eyes fixed ahead. She could feel the heat rising in her face, the familiar rush of panic she had learned to control over the years. Her mind replayed the name again and again, testing it, trying to dismiss it. There were other Daniel Dawsons. There had to be. It couldn't possibly be, but the context was wrong. The company, the access, the planning, the quiet certainty in the woman's voice. This wasn't coincidence. Behind her, the conversation resumed, even softer now. Taylor caught fragments, references to schedules, to observation, to patience. The woman spoke like someone used to thinking several steps ahead. The man listened more than he talked, offering short replies, questions that sounded practical rather than emotional. Taylor's thoughts spun. If they were talking about her Daniel, about her ex-husband, then this wasn't idle talk. It was a setup, something deliberate, something planned. Her first instinct was disbelief. The idea that she could be sitting in the front seat of her own car, unknowingly transporting people who were discussing her past life, her former marriage, her personal ruin. It felt unreal, almost absurd, like overhearing a story that belonged to someone else. Then came the moral weight of it, pressing in hard and fast. Should she say something? Should she confront them? Should she warn him? The thought of Daniel, smug, dismissive, untouchable in his courtroom victory, rose unbidden in her mind. The way he had looked at her as if she were a problem already solved. The way he had walked out without a backward glance. Her jaw tightened. She drove the rest of the route in a kind of controlled haze, hyper-aware of every sound, every word, every movement behind her. The city blurred again into bridges and lights and wet pavement, but this time she felt detached from it, as if she were watching herself from a distance. When they reached the destination, the passengers thanked her politely. The woman handed over the fare, adding a small tip with a brief smile. "Have a good night," she said softly. "You too," Taylor replied automatically. They stepped out, closing the door just as carefully as they had opened it. The car felt suddenly too quiet. Taylor waited until they disappeared into the building before she pulled away. Her hands trembled now that the effort of control was over. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts tangled and unresolved. The ride had ended like any other. No confrontation, no answers. But Taylor knew, with a certainty that left her breathless, that something had shifted. Whatever she had just heard had tethered itself to her life in a way she couldn't ignore. And she carried that knowledge with her as she drove on, shaken, unsettled, and unable to return to the calm she had felt only minutes before. The memory rose uninvited, sharp and insistent as Taylor drove on. Daniel Dawson had not always been the man he became, or at least that was what she had told herself for years. In the beginning, he had been attentive in a measured way, ambitious without seeming cold. He spoke often about growth, about building something lasting, about stability. Taylor had believed him. She had believed that the long hours and the constant pressure were temporary sacrifices, the price of a future they were creating together. Over time, though, the space between them widened. Daniel's conversations turned transactional. Affection became scheduled, brief, easily postponed. He was always somewhere else, always preparing for the next meeting, the next deal, the next opportunity that required him to be unavailable. Taylor learned to eat dinner alone, to fall asleep to the sound of a quiet house, to explain his absence away to friends and family without really knowing why she felt the need to defend him. The infidelity did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It came in fragments, late-night messages he forgot to delete, sudden trips that didn't line up, a change in the way he looked at her, as if she were already a thing of the past. When she finally confronted him, he didn't deny it. He simply framed it as inevitability, as something that happened when people grew in different directions. He spoke calmly, almost kindly, as if explaining an unfortunate but logical outcome. The divorce followed swiftly. Daniel moved with practiced efficiency, assembling a legal team that treated the dissolution of their marriage like a corporate restructuring. Taylor entered the courtroom believing that, at the very least, the truth would matter. She believed the law would recognize the years she had invested, the support she had given, the life they had built together. She was wrong. The DNA test was introduced without warning. Taylor remembered the moment clearly, the quiet rustle of paper, the way the room seemed to tilt as she tried to process what was being presented. She hadn't agreed to it. She hadn't even known it existed. She spoke up, her voice tight but controlled, insisting that there had been no consent, no proper procedure. Daniel's attorney countered smoothly, citing documents, signatures, technicalities. The judge listened, expression unreadable, then asked a few brief questions that Taylor didn't know how to answer. The legal language moved faster than she could follow. By the time the judge ruled the evidence admissible, the damage was already done. Daniel did not look at her. He sat with his hands folded, composed, as if the proceedings were a formality rather than a dismantling of someone's life. When the decision was announced, no spousal support, no shared assets beyond what had already been conceded. Taylor felt the weight of the room pressing down on her. The house, the one they had bought together, was awarded to Daniel outright. That house had never been just his. Taylor's family had helped with the down payment, pooling savings meant for something celebratory, something hopeful. They had trusted Daniel. They had trusted that the investment was in a shared future. Now, with a few clipped sentences and a gavel strike, it was gone. The humiliation came next. As the court adjourned, Daniel stood and turned toward her, not with remorse or restraint, but with a thin, satisfied smile. He leaned toward the woman seated behind him, his mistress no longer hidden, and kissed her openly. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. It was meant to be seen. Taylor felt heat rush to her face, her ears ringing as if she were underwater. No one intervened. No one said a word. To the court, it was irrelevant. To Daniel, it was victory. Outside, the city continued as usual. People walked past the courthouse steps without a glance, unaware that a life had just been reduced to paperwork and procedure. Taylor stood there for a moment, stunned, clutching a folder that now held nothing of value. She felt exposed, stripped not only of assets but of dignity, reduced to someone who had lost and had no leverage left to argue otherwise. Daniel had used every advantage available to him: money, influence, legal maneuvering, and he had done so without hesitation. The system had not failed accidentally. It had functioned exactly as it was designed to, favoring the prepared, the resourced, the ruthless. As Taylor merged back into traffic, the memory settled into place, heavy and unyielding. This was the man whose name she had just heard spoken in the back of her car. This was the context she carried with her now, the full measure of what Daniel Dawson was capable of. Her internal conflict no longer came from uncertainty about him. It came from the knowledge that whatever was being planned, whatever was unfolding beyond her sight, involved someone who had already proven he would destroy anything that stood in his way. And she had already paid the price for underestimating him once. Rachel Moore listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug as steam rose between them. They sat at Rachel's small kitchen table, the kind that had seen too many late-night conversations and not enough sleep. Lily was in the other room, occupied with an old coloring book and a set of dull crayons Rachel kept for occasions like this. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked jackets. When Taylor finished speaking, there was a brief silence. "You don't owe him anything," Rachel said finally. Her voice was calm but firm. Not a warning, not a heads-up, not even a second thought. Taylor stared down at the table, tracing a faint scratch in the wood with her fingertip. "I know," she said. "That's not what this is about." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying her. "Then what is it about?" Taylor hesitated. She replayed the ride in her mind, the lowered voices, the careful planning, the certainty with which Daniel's name had been spoken. "What if it's not just about him losing money?" she said. "What if it's something worse?" Rachel scoffed softly. "Daniel has spent years ruining people legally. That's his whole skill set. If someone finally beats him at his own game, that's not your responsibility. But what if it crosses a line?" Taylor pressed. "What if someone gets hurt? What if they're planning something criminal?" Rachel shook her head. "You're assuming the worst about people you don't even know. And even if it is criminal, why should you be the one to protect him? He didn't protect you." The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Taylor flinched, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She had spent months absorbing the fallout of Daniel's choices, sleeping on borrowed furniture, calculating grocery totals to the dollar, explaining to her daughter why they couldn't go back to the house with the big windows and the backyard. Daniel had never paused to consider the consequences of his actions. He had never worried about her conscience. "I just keep thinking about silence," Taylor said quietly. "About what it means." Rachel frowned. "It means survival. It means letting karma do its job." "Or it means looking the other way," Taylor replied. "And I don't know if I can do that." She stood and moved to the window, watching rain streak down the glass in thin, uneven lines. Cars passed below, headlights smeared into reflections. Portland felt distant from up here, insulated and detached. If something happens, Taylor went on, and I knew something beforehand, if I heard it and said nothing, how is that different from helping it happen? Rachel joined her at the window. Because you're not the one planning it, she said. You're not involved. You overheard something. That's it. Taylor nodded slowly, but the unease didn't lift. I keep thinking about Lily, she said, about what I'd want her to do someday, if she knew something was wrong. Rachel exhaled, frustration flickering across her face. You're not her moral textbook, she said. You're her mother. You need to protect yourself. And what if protecting myself means becoming someone I don't recognize? Taylor asked. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. Rachel knew Taylor well enough to see the decision forming, even before Taylor said it out loud. You're going to tell him, Rachel said. Taylor closed her eyes briefly. I think I have to. Rachel turned to face her fully now. Why? Not because he deserves it, Taylor said. He doesn't. And not because I want to help him. I don't. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But because I don't want whatever happens next on my conscience. I won't be able to live with that. Rachel searched her face, then shook her head in disbelief. You're too honest for your own good, she muttered. Maybe, Taylor agreed, but it's the only way I know how to be. Rachel reached out and squeezed her arm. Then do it, she said reluctantly. Say your piece. But once you do, it's done. You walk away. Taylor nodded. The decision settled into place with a strange sense of calm. She didn't feel righteous. She didn't feel relieved. She felt resolved. Later, as she buckled Lily into her car seat and pulled away from the curb, Taylor glanced at her phone resting in the console. Daniel's number was still there. She hadn't deleted it, though she'd considered it many times. She took a breath, steady and deliberate. This wasn't about him. It was about who she would be afterward. And that, more than anything Daniel had ever taken from her, still mattered. Taylor waited until Lily was asleep before making the call. The apartment was quiet, the kind of fragile quiet that came only after a long day finally gave up. Taylor sat at the small kitchen table with her phone in her hand, staring at Daniel's name on the screen. She hadn't spoken to him directly since the hearing. Every practical exchange had gone through lawyers. This call felt like crossing a line she had sworn she wouldn't approach again. She pressed the button before she could change her mind. It rang twice. What is it now? Daniel's voice came through sharp and irritated, as if she had interrupted something important. If this is about money, don't bother. The court was very clear. That's not why I'm calling, Taylor said. She kept her tone even, controlled. I need you to listen. Daniel laughed quietly. That's new. Go on. She told him what she had overheard. Not dramatically, not emotionally. She explained it the way she would explain a traffic hazard or a mechanical issue, facts first, impressions second, a man and a woman, a conversation, a plan to enter his company through a cleaning position. His name spoken clearly, intentional, deliberate. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for her to wonder if, for once, she had managed to surprise him. Then he laughed. Is that it? He said. You called me for that? I'm serious, Daniel, Taylor replied. This didn't sound like gossip. It sounded planned. Oh, I'm sure it did, he said, amusement thick in his voice. You've always had a talent for spinning things into something bigger than they are. This isn't about us, she said. It's about you being careful. Careful of what? Daniel scoffed. A cleaning lady with a master plan? Please. He went on without waiting for a response. You know, it's funny you bring this up. I just hired someone new. Smart. Attractive. Knows how to make an impression. Maybe that's what this is really about. Taylor closed her eyes briefly. This isn't jealousy. Sure it isn't, Daniel replied. You hear my name once, and suddenly you're worried about my safety. That's rich. I'm not worried about you, Taylor said, her voice steady. I'm warning you. From what? That people want a piece of what I've built, he said. That's always been true. Comes with success. She tried again. Just be cautious. That's all I'm saying. Daniel sighed theatrically as if indulging a child. Listen, Taylor. I appreciate the concern. Truly. But you don't understand the world I operate in. People try things. They fail. That's how it goes. His tone shifted then, sharpening. And let's be honest, you don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to judgment. You're driving strangers around for tips now. I think I can handle myself. The words landed hard, precisely where he intended them to. Taylor felt the familiar sting. But it passed quickly. She had expected this. In some way, she had needed to hear it. I've said what I needed to say, she replied. Do what you want with it. Don't worry, Daniel said lightly. I always do. There was a click as he ended the call. Taylor lowered the phone slowly and set it on the table. Her hand was steady. Her breathing was even. Whatever reaction she had anticipated, anger, regret, relief, didn't come. Instead, there was a strange emptiness, followed by something close to acceptance. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. Somewhere behind her, Lily shifted in her sleep. Taylor rested her forehead briefly against the cool pane. She had warned him, not because he deserved it, not because she believed it would change anything, but because she could not say later that she had known and done nothing. As she turned away from the window and moved quietly down the hall, Taylor understood something with clarity she hadn't had before. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences Daniel faced, were no longer hers to carry. She had done all she ethically could, and that at least would have to be enough. Taylor saw him 3 days later. She was slowing near the curb on a side street not far from the river, easing her car into traffic after dropping off a passenger, when a familiar shape caught her attention. A man stood near a bus shelter, shoulders hunched against the damp air, his clothes layered and worn, a knit cap pulled low over his brow. At first, she would have driven past him like she had driven past dozens of others. Portland had its share of people living on the margins, and she had learned not to stare. Then he lifted his head. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, recognition. Taylor's foot hovered over the brake. She pulled over a few yards ahead, heart beating faster than it should have for such a small moment. She told herself she was mistaken, that grief and exhaustion were making patterns where there were none. The man approached slowly, hands visible, movements careful. Up close. The disguise was more obvious than it had first appeared. The grime was uneven, the beard too deliberately unkempt. His eyes were alert, focused. Nothing like the dull vacancy she expected. "Miss Dawson," he said quietly, stopping a few steps away. She stared at him. "Do I know you?" He nodded once. "You drove me, a few nights ago, to the hotel." The memory clicked into place with unsettling speed. The lowered voices, the name, the plan. "You were with a woman," Taylor said, "on your way from the transit hub." "That's right," he replied. "My sister." Taylor glanced instinctively toward the back seat, where Lily was buckled in, absorbed in a tablet game with the volume low. She rolled the window down just enough to keep her voice from carrying. "What do you want?" she asked. "To explain," he said, "and to apologize for involving you without your consent." She hesitated, then unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in carefully, closing it behind him. The smell of damp fabric and cold air filled the car, but beneath it was something cleaner, more deliberate. "My name is Noah Vale," he said once they were seated. "The woman you heard, that was Catherine Vale." Taylor tightened her grip on the steering wheel. You said her name like this was planned. It was, Noah said, long before you ever picked us up. He didn't rush. He spoke the way someone did when they had rehearsed the truth many times, waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. Our father ran a mid-sized investment firm, he explained. Not flashy, not reckless. He mentored people, trusted them. One of them was Daniel Dawson. Taylor felt her stomach drop. Daniel was his right hand, Noah continued. Helped manage accounts, had access to everything. When our father died unexpectedly, Daniel stepped in to handle things. By the time Catherine got back from overseas and I finished dealing with probate, there was nothing left. He looked down at his hands. Documents had been altered. Transfers approved that never should have gone through. Our names were removed from records we didn't even know existed. Taylor said nothing. The pieces were aligning too cleanly to deny. When we challenged it, Noah went on, Daniel claimed fraud, accused us of trying to steal from the company. He knew the system, knew how to push the right buttons. His jaw tightened. I went to prison for it, for years. For something you didn't do, Taylor said quietly. He nodded. Catherine stayed out of it. She changed her name, stayed invisible, waited. He glanced at her. She didn't come back until she knew how to do this the right way. Taylor exhaled slowly. The cleaning job, Noah confirmed. Access without suspicion. Observation without confrontation. Everything documented. Everything legal. No violence, Taylor said. No, Noah replied. We're not interested in hurting anyone. We want proof. We want the truth where it belongs, on record. Taylor leaned back, slightly, her thoughts racing. Daniel had stolen from her, lied to the court, stripped her of everything she could claim. But this was systemic, calculated, a pattern, not an exception. I warned him, she said. He didn't listen. Noah gave a faint, humorless smile. We didn't expect him to. She studied him, seeing now the discipline beneath the disguise, the restraint. This wasn't recklessness. It was patience sharpened into purpose. You don't need to worry, Noah said. We're almost done. Catherine is exactly where she needs to be. Taylor looked ahead at the road, the familiar streets suddenly altered by the knowledge she carried. Daniel Dawson wasn't just her past. He was a man who had left a trail of damage behind him, each victim isolated enough to believe they were alone. Now she knew they weren't. As Noah stepped out of the car and blended back into the city, Taylor sat in silence for a long moment. Lily's laughter floated softly from the back seat, innocent and unaware. Taylor started the engine and pulled away, her hand steady but her understanding forever changed. Whatever was coming for Daniel wasn't born of spite. It was the consequence of everything he had done, and everything he thought no one would ever connect. Catherine Vale moved through Daniel Dawson's office the way she had planned to. Quietly, efficiently, without leaving an impression that lingered too long. At first, she was exactly what she appeared to be. Another temporary hire, another face that blended into the background of glass walls and muted carpets. She arrived early, left late, and spoke only when spoken to. Her work was meticulous. Floors gleamed. Conference rooms were reset with almost surgical precision. No one questioned her presence. And that was the point. Daniel noticed her almost immediately. It wasn't her appearance that caught his attention at first, but her timing. She was always there when he arrived, always finishing up when he left. She knew the rhythms of the office within days, when the executive assistants took lunch, when the senior managers cleared out for meetings, when the cleaning staff usually rotated. Catherine learned which doors stayed unlocked longer than they should, which security codes were changed on schedule and which were neglected. Daniel began staying later. Meetings ran long. His temper shortened. Success had made him careless in ways he didn't recognize. He delegated less, trusted his instincts more, and dismissed concerns that didn't arrive wrapped in numbers and projections. When Catherine spoke to him directly, it was only to confirm instructions or clarify tasks. Her tone was deferential, her posture non-threatening. That was enough. He started asking her questions that had nothing to do with cleaning. Small things at first. Where she had worked before, how long she planned to stay, whether she found the hours manageable. Catherine answered honestly where it cost her nothing and vaguely where it mattered. She never lingered. She never pushed. She let Daniel fill the silence with his own assumptions. While Daniel's focus drifted, Monica Reed's sharpened. She had been used to being the only woman who held his attention, the one who knew his schedule, his moods, his vulnerabilities. When Daniel stopped calling during the day and started arriving home, distracted, Monica noticed. When his compliments grew automatic and his temper unpredictable, she noticed that too. And when he mentioned the new hire in passing, the cleaning woman, he called her, dismissive and careless, Monica filed the detail away. It didn't take long for curiosity to turn into suspicion. Monica had always understood leverage. She had learned early that information was power, and she had never relied solely on Daniel's word when it came to protecting her position. Quietly, methodically, she began installing small, concealed cameras throughout the office. One in the corridor outside Daniel's private office, another angled toward the filing cabinets, a third, carefully positioned to capture the safe built into the wall behind his desk. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't ask permission. She justified it to herself as precaution, as loyalty, as something she was doing for him as much as for herself. The footage didn't reveal anything at first. Days passed, then a week. Catherine moved through the office as she always had, cleaning, organizing, fading into the background. Monica began to wonder if she had been wrong, if paranoia had gotten the better of her. Then, late one evening, the feed changed. Catherine entered Daniel's office alone. The building was nearly empty. The lights were dimmed. The hum of the HVAC system, the only sound. She paused at the door, listening, then stepped inside and closed it behind her. Her movements were different now, measured, purposeful. She crossed the room and stopped in front of the safe. From her pocket, she removed a folded piece of paper. She studied it briefly, then began entering a code. Monica leaned closer to the screen, her pulse quickening. The keypad beeped softly. The lock disengaged with a quiet click. The safe opened. Catherine didn't rush. She examined the contents with practiced calm, removing folders one by one, photographing documents with her phone, returning everything exactly as she found it. She left no visible trace of her presence. When she finished, she closed the safe, smoothed her uniform, and exited the office as if nothing had happened. Monica sat frozen, staring at the screen. The betrayal was unmistakable, the evidence undeniable. She didn't hesitate. Daniel answered her call on the second ring, irritation already edging his voice. Monica didn't waste time explaining. She told him to come to the office. Immediately. She said she had proof, something he needed to see with his own eyes. "What is this about?" Daniel demanded. "You trusted the wrong person," Monica replied, her voice tight with triumph. "And she's been stealing from you." Daniel arrived less than 15 minutes later, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Monica replayed the footage without commentary, watching his face harden as Catherine's actions unfolded on the screen. For the first time in days, Daniel felt something close to focus. Whatever game Catherine Vale thought she was playing. Monica was certain of one thing as she shut down the cameras and slipped the phone into her pocket. She had just exposed the traitor, and Daniel Dawson would not take that lightly. Daniel Dawson didn't shout at first. He stood just inside the doorway of his office, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching Catherine Vale as if she were an object that had disappointed him. Monica Reed remained a step behind, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on Catherine with open hostility. The office lights were fully on now, the glass walls reflecting their tense silhouettes back at them. "Sit down," Daniel said finally, his voice controlled, clipped. "We need to talk." Catherine remained where she was, hands relaxed at her sides. "If this is about my work, I've finished for the evening." "Don't play games," Monica snapped. "We have you on camera." That earned a pause. Catherine turned her head slightly, regarding Monica with calm curiosity. "Do you?" Daniel stepped forward. "You went into my safe. You photographed confidential documents. That's theft. Corporate espionage." His lips curved into a thin smile. "You realize I could have the police here in minutes." Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "You could," she said evenly, "but that would be a mistake." Daniel laughed once. Sharply, "You think you're in a position to negotiate?" "I think," Catherine replied, "that you don't yet understand the position you're actually in." Monica scoffed. "This is rich. You get caught red-handed, and suddenly you're confident." Catherine didn't respond to her. Instead, she reached into her bag and removed a slim folder, placing it carefully on the desk between them. "Before you make any calls," she said, "you might want to look at what's already been documented." Daniel didn't touch the folder. "I don't need to," he said. "Security footage is enough." "You might reconsider," Catherine said quietly. "That footage doesn't show what I found, or what's already been submitted." Something in her tone shifted the air in the room. Daniel's smile faded. He picked up the folder and opened it. The first few pages were copies of financial statements. He scanned them quickly, his expression tightening. Monica leaned in, frowning. "What is this?" Daniel demanded. "Transactions you authorized," Catherine said. "Accounts you redirected. Transfers approved under false pretenses." Daniel slammed the folder shut. "That's nonsense." "Is it?" Catherine asked. "Because the originals are already in the hands of people who know exactly what they're looking at." Monica's face drained of color. "Who are you?" she asked. Catherine straightened. "My name is Catherine Vale," she said, "but you wouldn't recognize it. You knew my father, though." Daniel froze. "No," he said slowly. "That's not possible." "My father trusted you," Catherine continued, her voice steady. "You were his right hand, his executor. When he died, you took advantage of that trust. You forged documents. You erased my brother and me from our own inheritance." Daniel shook his head. "You're lying." At that moment, the office door opened again. Noah Vale stepped inside, no longer disguised, his movements calm and deliberate. He closed the door behind him and nodded once to Catherine. "You," Daniel said, recognition dawning too late. "I had you arrested." "And convicted," Noah replied, "based on paperwork you fabricated." Monica looked between them, her breathing shallow. "This is insane." "No," Catherine said. "It's overdue." Daniel's hand went to his phone. "I'm calling my attorney." "That won't help," Noah said. "The warrants are already signed." As if on cue, the sound of voices echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable presence of authority. 2 uniformed officers entered first, then a third in plain clothes who displayed a badge without ceremony. Daniel Dawson, the detective, said, "You're being detained pending investigation into multiple counts of financial fraud, forgery, and obstruction." Daniel stared at him. "This is a mistake." "We've reviewed the evidence," the detective replied, "including documentation recovered tonight and material submitted earlier this week." Monica stepped forward. "What about me?" The detective turned to her. "Monica Reed, you are also being detained for conspiracy and evidence tampering." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I was protecting him," she said weakly. "By installing illegal surveillance?" the detective asked. "Yes, we noticed." Daniel's composure finally broke. "You think this ends me?" he snapped, looking at Catherine. "I'll fight this." "You already did," Catherine said. "You just didn't know it yet." The officers moved in, placing restraints on Daniel and Monica with practiced efficiency. There was no shouting, no struggle, only the quiet click of cuffs closing around wrists that had once signed away other people's lives with a pen. As they were let out, Daniel looked back at Catherine one last time. There was no triumph in her expression, only resolve. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, indifferent to the collapse happening behind glass walls. By the time the office was empty again, the truth was no longer hidden. It was catalogued, recorded, and irreversible. Justice hadn't arrived loudly, but it had arrived. The news broke on a gray morning, the kind Portland seemed to specialize in. Taylor stood in her kitchen with a mug of coffee cooling between her hands as the television murmured in the background. She hadn't meant to watch. She hadn't planned on it. But when the anchor spoke Daniel Dawson's name, she stopped moving. The report was concise, almost clinical. Daniel had been convicted on multiple counts of financial fraud, forgery, and obstruction. The evidence was described in careful terms: documents recovered from his office, corroborated records, a pattern of misconduct spanning years. The sentence followed: substantial prison time, asset forfeiture, restitution ordered for those affected. Taylor turned the volume down and leaned against the counter. There was no surge of triumph, no rush of vindication, just a quiet release, as if a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally loosened its grip. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded with the same methodical precision that had undone Daniel's schemes. Legal notices arrived. Phone calls were returned. Meetings were scheduled and kept. Taylor sat across from attorneys who spoke to her with a respect she hadn't felt in a long time, explaining what would happen next, what had already been decided. The house was returned to her. She stood in the entryway the first time she walked back inside alone, keys warm in her palm. The door opening with a familiar creak, she remembered. The room smelled faintly of dust and neglect, but they were still hers. The light through the windows fell at the same angle in the late afternoon. Nothing about the structure had changed, yet everything had. There was compensation as well. Not enough to erase the years of strain or restore what had been lost emotionally, but enough to provide stability, enough to breathe. What Taylor learned later, almost by accident, surprised her more than any court ruling. Noah hadn't mentioned it himself. It came from an attorney who spoke casually, as if it were a minor detail. During the investigation, when restitution had been discussed, Noah had insisted Taylor's situation be reviewed separately. He had provided documentation, statements, context. He had made sure her name was included, not as an afterthought, but as someone who had been wronged in a way that mattered. When she confronted him about it, he simply shrugged. It was the right thing to do, he said. Life didn't transform overnight. It steadied. Taylor returned to work for a while, still driving, still following routes she knew by heart. But the pressure was different now. She no longer calculated every expense with dread. She enrolled Lily in after-school care without guilt, watching her daughter run toward a room full of other children instead of climbing into the back seat again. Eventually, Taylor left rideshare driving altogether. The decision felt less like an escape and more like a closing chapter. She found work that kept her days predictable and her evenings free. She reclaimed time, quiet, choice. Noah remained on the edges of her life at first. They spoke occasionally, usually about practical matters, paperwork, loose ends, shared memories of what Daniel had done, examined without bitterness. Over time, the conversations stretched. They talked about ordinary things: food, weather, the small habits that filled a day. There was no rush, no grand declaration. Whatever formed between them did so carefully, built on mutual understanding rather than need. It was restrained, intentional, something neither of them tried to define too quickly. One evening, as Taylor tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up at her with the solemn certainty only children possessed. "You're not tired all the time anymore," she said. Taylor smiled softly. "I know." After the light was turned off and the apartment settled into its familiar quiet, Taylor sat by the window and watched the city glow below. Cars moved steadily through intersections. Lives intersected and diverged, unseen and unremarked. She thought back to the moment in her car when she had heard Daniel's name spoken by strangers. How easily she could have dismissed it. How tempting silence had been. How heavy the decision had felt. Justice, she realized, rarely announced itself with drama. It arrived through paperwork and persistence, through people willing to pay attention and refuse to look away. It arrived because someone chose not to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Integrity, she understood now, was not a weakness. It didn't guarantee protection. It didn't promise reward. But it allowed a person to live with themselves afterward. And silence was always a choice, just like speaking up. Taylor rested her hand against the glass, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, grounding her in the present. The past had not been erased. It had been answered. As the night deepened and the city carried on, she felt something settle inside her that she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For those listening, what would you have done in Taylor's place? Would you have stayed silent or spoken up, knowing the cost either way? Share your thoughts below.